Hello po, good afternoon sa inyong lahat dyan sa Pilipinas, and it is 9:04 p.m. here in Seattle, Washington. I know many of you will be watching this as a playback dahil marami sa inyo mga guro ay nasa school ngayon. So I believe you will be watching this as a playback po. Please enjoy, and we have a very really interesting topic today, and something that many will be interested to know. Actually, many teachers are looking forward to this event. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you our program producer, Ma'am Andre. Hold on a second. Ma'am Andre, how are you?
I'm doing good po. Good evening po, Sir Alan. Magandang hapon po, mga kakultura sa iba't ibang panig ng universe. Masaya ako na ibahagi sa inyo ang ating guest artist or lecturer ngayong araw kasi excited ako, nakalinya sa mga hinahangaan ko pagdating sa mga um, mythical stories na nakahanay mula kay Sir M.A. Mark Del
Yes,
Rosario. Yes po. At saka marami pa mong artist na katulad niya na writer na excited ako ipapakilala sa inyo. Sana mag-enjoy kayo sa aming presentation ngayong araw. So, ang ating guest lecturer ngayon ay award-winning author known for her stories that focuses on local supernatural entities. Ooh. When she isn't writing fiction, she's hemming agriculture magazines. Wow, the country's longest running publication of its kind. She believes that both supernatural and horror fiction and agriculture have the same function to save the world from the apocalypse. Could you imagine that? I'm just wondering what is that all about. Parang naiiba siya sa lahat. So, mga kakultura, let us welcome to Kolekteratura and to Kultura, Ma'am Yvette Tan. Makulturang hapon po, Ma'am Yvette.
ay
For
nakamute siya.
inviting me. Thank you very
Yes,
much for
thank you.
inviting me. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone watching.
Yes.
So I was
Thank you
yes.
po, ma'am. Thank you so much po for na pinaunlakan niyo po kami sa aming invitation. At ito nga, ang ganda po ng topic dahil it's about the power of chismis in folklore storytelling. Nakaka-intriga ano po yung
Sa akin
topic
lang,
ng oo.
nagsabing, sa mga millennials, Sir Alan, sa mga millennials, tinatawag itong marites.
Marites.
Maring chismis. Yes po,
I've heard that a
marites.
couple of
So,
times but I actually don't know much about it. Sabi ko bakit palaging may hashtag marites, may hashtag marites. Yung pala yun. So yung mga marites, mga
Mari,
chismis, ganun. Machismosa, ganun.
yes po. Yes po.
Okay. Mami Bet, we're very excited to listen to your presentation. So, yeah, we'll have you take it away. Your
Okay. I will share my screen. Share screen. Please let me know if you're seeing this.
There we go. We got it po.
There we go. Excellent.
Okay. Thank you po.
Yes.
Ma'am, we are excited.
Okay.
Take it away po.
There we go. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. I was asked to talk about my writing process. So what goes on in my writing, how I've turned small ideas, sometimes fragments, like sometimes a phrase into a whole story. So right now, before we begin, hold on there. Nagsimula sa Chismis, the power of gossip in folkloric storytelling. So I'm going to talk about why gossip, because usually when we say chismis, when we say gossip, medyo hindi natin binibigyan ng importansya ang chismis, di ba? gawain lang ng mga kapitbahay yun. Pero gusto ko pakita na medyo importante din siya, lalo-lalo na sa, yun nga, storytelling that involves folklore. So who am I and why am I here? So I am a fiction writer who uses folklore and urban legends a lot in my work. So mahilig din ako sa, may kaka-relaunch lang ng first collection ko in English, Waking the Dead and Other Stories under Anvil Publishing. Nasa pre-order na siya sa Anvil website. Sorry, nag-plug lang ako ng sandali. Tapos may book launch po ako ng this Friday online. So, bukod doon, I'm also interested in real-life supernatural phenomena and their possible scientific explanation. So lahat tayo, mga Pinoy, mahilig tayo sa, kunyari, mga multo, mga kababalaghan. Gusto ko rin malaman na bukod dun sa kwento na naririnig natin sa mga kapitbahay natin or sa mga kaibigan natin, naniniwala ako na kung totoo sila, ibig sabihin may posibleng scientific explanation sila na hindi pa natin nahanap. So kasama yun dun sa interest ko sa topic. So where do I find inspiration? So lumaki akong takutin ako. Lalo nung bata ko, lumaki akong takutin. So like I said, like it says here, I grew up in a haunted house but I didn't know it. So this is where I find inspiration. Takutin ako nung bata ako, tapos minsan, either may nangyayari sa akin na hindi ko ma-explain or may nakakwento sa akin ng mga kaibigan ko or may narinig sila, hindi nila maintindihan kung bakit siya nangyayari. And the title of this talk, kahit na Chismis, the first thing that I remember sparking my interest is from Inday Badiday in the 80s. Inday Badiday was a talk show host who I'm sure a lot of you remember her from her TV show, either See Through or Eye to Eye. So my first inclination that these storytelling, these things, yung mga kwentong kababalaghan ay pwedeng baka totoo or baka hindi lang sila guni-guni is dahil nakita ko siya sa, hindi ko alam kung see-through or eye to eye, but I remember it very clearly. Ang report ni Inday Badide ay may isang babaeng nanganak ng dalag. So, kung yun, pwedeng, kung ganun kwento ay pwedeng maging news story, ibig sabihin, baka totoo nga siya. Or, kasi it made it into mainstream media, di ba? So, bukod doon, I also grew up in the 80s where there were a lot of stories that came into the news. Kasi if you grew up in the 80s, you'll notice na pag inon mo yung TV, pag nasa news, minsan may mga news stories na hindi mo alam kung bakit sila nandun. Parang aside from, may politician na may nangyari sa politician, may nangyari sa parang may society something. Mixed into that is may mga nasapian na bata sa eskwelahan. So, or may manananggal na nahanap sa temple in Manila. So, the supernatural was very, very, very much mixed into what was local news in the 80s and the 90s. And I'm pretty sure in the 70s also. So, other pop culture chismises of the 80s and 90s were the White Lady of Baleta Drive, very, very famous. The snake man underneath a certain department store, which was made popular by an actress na nahulog daw siya dun sa, may trapdoor daw sa dressing room. Nahulog siya at hinabol siya ng isang half man, half snake. Parang tikbalang pero ahas. And then, as I mentioned, yung manananggal seeking refuge in a temple in Binondo. Naalala ko yun, nung first year high school ako noon, lahat ng tabloids may kwento na may sinara yung isang Chinese temple sa Binondo kasi may manananggal doon. And then, coinciding with her movie Impact Tita, may lumabas na chismis na aswang daw talaga si Jean Garcia. So, may mga ganong nangyayari ng 80s and 90s. And so a lot of these they've become they're more urban legends than folk tales. Urban legends, I believe, are modern folk tales. So, bakit tayo nagkaka-urban legend? So number one, they're a form of oral history and modern mythology. So we've moved from the farms to the cities. So tsaka, we're also aided now not just by word of mouth but also by technology. So nire-record na natin sa newspaper, nire-record natin sa TV, ngayon nire-record na natin sa internet. Tsaka a lot of these urban legends galing sila they come from an era that discourages or does not rely on written records. So, kailan lumalabas yung mga kwentong ganito na may nakitang something, may nakitang engkanto yung kapitbahay mo or may nakitang white lady yung kaibigan mo. Usually nangyayari yon kapag bored kayo, kunyari nagiinuman kayo, drinking sessions, or in the case of the Manila Film Center, which in the 70s, which, for those who don't know, what happened in the Manila Film Center was when it was being built, the building process was so rushed na may gumiba na floor, tapos gumiba siya gumiba siya, crushing and killing a lot of construction workers. So dahil it was the 70s, we were under martial law, may media blackout, hindi encouraged ang reporting, truthful or not. Nobody knew what was happening, and a lot of urban legends grew around it, which persist to this day. So we're not really sure what's real and what's not anymore. So may mga chismis, na nahulugan daw ng mga construction materials yung mga workers, hindi daw sila, iniwan na lang daw sila, parang pinutulan na lang yung mga body parts. They just hacked off the body parts that were sticking out just so they could pave over everything and have the film center ready in time for opening. So may mga chismis ganun na dahil nga may blackout, media blackout, dahil walang nakapasok at walang naka-imbestiga nung panahon na yon, hindi natin alam hanggang ngayon kung totoo or hindi. Although, there have been many legitimate media sources who have tried to investigate this. I think the most recent one that I can remember, please let me know if there have been more recent ones, was an investigation that Howie Severino did, where he tried to find out kung totoo ngang may naiwan. Kasi totoong may aksidente, pero may totoo bang may naiwan, totoo bang hindi or if people are still buried there, or totoo bang may multo. So these are things that also bring on urban legends. And last but not the least, they're fun to listen to. Who doesn't like, especially when you're drunk or when you're trying to scare yourselves? Di ba, syempre, sobrang interesting makinig sa mga kwentong ganito. Yung mga kwentong kababalaghan, kwentong hindi malam kung totoo or hindi. Very, in tabloid words, very titillating. So how do I use urban legends in my writing? So I'm going to give you a few examples based on stories in which are coming out in the book, and one of them that's not there. So, for example, I have a story called The Bridge, which is set in 1972. When the San Juanico Bridge was being built. So, yung kwento noon is this story, produkto siya ng mga lahat ng narinig ko nung bata ako. So, lahat ng chismis narinig ko. Kasi, di naman ako lumaking interested sa politics eh. Nung lumaki ako, interested lang ako sa yung mga supernatural stories, mga urban legends, mga naririnig ko sa mga adults. Dun lang ako interesado. So, itong The Bridge, it's set in, again, 1972 when the San Juanico Bridge was being built. So, the story behind it is this psychic child this psychic child runs into how do, I don't know how to explain it without giving it away, but basically it's about the building of the San Juanico Bridge. And the inspiration behind it is again an urban legend. So um, this has nothing to do with what I believe, like what I believe or I don't believe in politics. This has everything to do with what I heard as a child, what the stories I heard as a child. And I grew up, the San Juanico Bridge was built in the early 70s. I grew up in the 80s. So just to show you how long this legend, this urban legend has persisted, more than a decade. And then I wrote this, I think, in the early mid 2000s. So that's how long the urban legend has persisted. The urban legend I heard growing up in the 80s was you should never leave the house because if you do, you will get kidnapped and you will be sacrificed to appease the spirits of the San Juanico Bridge who were angered when an accident happened during the bridge building. So because of that, because of this urban legend that happened before I was born, this is which persisted until my childhood. I came up with this story, and the thing about this story is, when I wrote this story, I was working in the newsroom in the early 2000s. I wrote it in the early 2000s. Um, the only quote unquote research I had, because I didn't want to base it on fact. I really consciously wanted to base it on chismis, kung ano yung narinig ko. That's all I wanted to base it on. The only question I had, which didn't even make it into the story, was I asked one of my senior editors, when was the bridge constructed? He said 1972. Okay, that's all I needed to know, and that's how I wrote the story. The weird thing about it is, so after I wrote the story, na-publish na siya, people liked it. The story, part of the story takes place in a house I had envisioned in Leyte. I thought that was going to be the ancestral home of the main character. The weird thing is, I came across it not in Leyte, but in Ilocos Norte, which is still a province close to the main character's heart. And the layout was exactly the same as the house I had envisioned when I was writing the story. It's a weird coincidence. May not have been the exact same province, but it's close enough. Which just goes to show that even when you're writing fiction, sometimes synchronicity creeps in and you don't know that you might be drawing from an unnatural source. Or it's interesting. Okay, I also use real life experiences in my stories. So I don't usually write about my real life. I've encountered a lot of weird things, especially after 2018, when I accidentally when I accidentally became more sensitive towards energies and these things. But even before that, I usually, like I mentioned, I'm interested in supernatural in real life. And usually when I encounter real supernatural experiences, they go on my blog. So I interview people about what they do, their ghost stories, that goes on my blog. All the true supernatural experiences go on my blog, including mine. I do have a story in my book, which is a real life experience. But the weird thing is, it's a real life experience except for the supernatural part. The story Daddy talks about how it's basically a story about a writer with my name, Yvette Tan, who gets phone calls from her dead father, her father who just recently passed away. Now, people have come up to me and asked if this story is real. And the thing about this story is everything there is real except for the supernatural aspect. Never nagparamdam yung daddy ko. Thankfully, at ayaw kong mangyari yun. Pero yung lahat ng nangyari dun sa like the way he passed on, the way people dealt with it, down to the model of my phone, down to who I was interviewing at that time. These are all real life experiences that made it into a story. And the thing about this story is it helped me come, you don't come to terms, but it was part of my grieving process when my father passed away, to write about this story, because in my head it was, what would have happened if he actually called me? But I don't want that to happen in real life, so I put it in a story. So this is the only exception. I usually don't use real life experiences in my stories. Okay, sometimes I will use real world issues in my stories. This is, I have a story called Siki Horror. It can be found on my website, wala siya sa libro ko, because I plan to put it in my second book. And until then, it's on my website because some students use it in their classes. I think it's being taught in English classes in Silliman and Ateneo. So instead of having to email people the story, I just put it there on my website until it finds a home, a permanent home in a collection. So anyway, the real world issue in this story is the mail order bride. Um, the premise of the story is this foreigner orders a mail order bride from the Philippines, and he wonders, bakit ang mura niya? And then he finds out he has to get her in parts. So kasi tayo mga Pilipino, mahilig tayo sa tingi. So tingi-tingi na nakukuha, tapos ina-assemble na lang niya. So that's the premise behind Siki Horror. And it's a dark comedy, and this is where I realized that different people will read your story in different ways. Because for me, the only reason I wrote this was because I like the idea of the wordplay Siki Horror. What would a foreigner think? How would a foreigner spell out our province Siki Horror in their mind, and how Siki Horror in the Philippines is known as a very, very mystical province. Actually, nakapunta na ako Siki Horror, sobrang ang ganda. Everyone should visit. So that plus the concept of yung mga Pilipino mahilig sa tingi, this is what gave the story life for me. Now, many people have read it, and everyone has put their own interpretation in it. For a lot of guys, a lot of men like it because I have been asked by straight men if I'm sure that I'm not a man, because apparently the story very much follows the way a straight man would think. I've also been asked if I am a feminist writer, because a lot of feminists like the way the story, like the way the females in the story act. I've also been asked if I was if this was something post-colonial, because it's a non-Filipino, in this case a white person, ordering a mail order bride from the Philippines, but expecting a very, very meek, mild, sweet-tempered Filipina, and not quite getting that, but not being too mad about it either. And the way it's written, I tried to make it's not scary at all. It's very tongue-in-cheek, comedic. It's actually a food story because the main character likes food, and I tried to tell it in terms of food, but a lot of people tell me it's a sex story. So it really depends on how you read it. This is the story where you can see that really the author is dead, and it's what the readers put into the story, get out of the story, that's important. Because as the author, you're never there beside the readers to say, mali ka, dapat ito yung nangyayari. Ito yung ibig kong sabihin. As an author, you don't have that luxury. So it's really what the readers pull out of your story is what's important to them. And you really have no say in that anymore. It's also where I would like to show that horror isn't a genre, it's an emotion. Dahil a lot of people, pag nababasa nila yung mga kwento ko, a lot of them will say, hindi naman nakakatakot. Ako naman, sasabihin ko, hindi naman talaga siya nakakatakot. the term horror doesn't come from the kailangan may jump scare, kailangan may takot. Minsan, like sometimes it'll come from binaba mo na yung kwento, na iniisip mo pa rin, hindi ka mapakali, hindi mo alam kung bakit, iniisip mo pa rin. That can be part of the horror. It can also be the creep factor. Suddenly, hindi ka nga natakot, but you don't really want to go out alone at night anymore, or you don't want to turn off your lights. So horror can come in many, many different and more subtle ways. Okay. Oops. I also use real world issues in my stories. So in Kulog, which is a children's story, I use folklore to talk about a sensitive topic. In this case, Kulog is a story about a kapre who befriends the little girl whose family moves into the house next to his. So bago siyang kapitbahay na bata, and this masungit kapre ends up being friends with her, and he sees that her childhood isn't as happy as it should be, and when he tries to protect her, this is a kapre who values his privacy. He doesn't like humans because all he knows is that humans have destroyed his forest. Siya nila yung nag-iisa. Humans have driven away his family. And the one time he reaches out to a human child because he feels sorry for her things. It's not a story with a happy ending that people expect. And my big theme really in a lot of my stories is that humans are the real monsters. Takot nga tayo sa kapre, takot nga tayo sa tikbalan, takot tayo sa white lady. Pero in the end, it's people we should be scared of other people. Okay, I also use another example of using folklore in my writing is in All the Birds, which was published in All That Darkness Allows by Summit Books, and also in World Horror Stories Volume 1, published by Valancourt Press from the States. So for this one, All the Birds, it's about a story. The story is about a woman who returns to her barrio to take care of her dying friend. So for this, I focused on one aspect of aswang lore, which is how an aswang dies. The Visayans believe that if an aswang is dying, an aswang cannot die unless the essence of being an aswang is passed on voluntarily to another person. And there are certain rituals that go about this. Usually, it is passed on in the form of a black chick, which is regurgitated by the aswang and has to be taken in by the person accepting this ability or curse, depending on how you think of it. So para siyang bato ni Darna, except sisyo na itim. And all of this, I didn't learn. I learned growing up. I learned from listening to stories. I learned from mostly from my sister's yaya, who's from Antique and whose mother was a healer, but all her children refused to take on her abilities. So it's really that close. It's really talking to people who've experienced this firsthand, or sometimes, in my case, my experience in it firsthand. I also sometimes use collective consciousness to create a new monster, like in Ilawod, which is a feature film I wrote, directed by Dan Villegas, starring Ian Veneracion and Isa Calzado. Ian Veneracion won Best Actor for this film in Fantasporto, the horror fantasy festival in Portugal. So for this film, we created a new monster. But she was so real, people thought we were using a real monster. And I had people texting me to ask what are the abilities of this monster? Totoo ba siya? Saan ko siya nakita? And only to be disappointed when I tell them the truth. We invented her, but we didn't invent her from scratch. We took all collective consciousness is what what communities believe subconsciously or consciously or unconsciously that has patterns all throughout. And for this, we chose the pattern of the river monster. Uh, the river, the river where the monster from a body of water where somebody dies once a year. We've all heard that story. We've all heard that legend, that folklore. But hindi lang siya sa Pilipinas nangyayari. Kahit anong bansa, kahit saang bansa ka pumunta, may maririnig kang kwento tungkol sa isang sapa, isang lawa, isang parte ng beach, na kung saan may namamatay every year, or quote-unquote, kasi hinihingi siya, may kailangan na sakripisyo. Doon namin kinuha yung essence ng spirit na yun. Tapos ginawa na lang namin ang kwento. Now, creating a monster from scratch can be very effective. It can go the other way around. Whereas earlier in this story, I talked about how an urban legend like the San Juanico Bridge was the catalyst for my story. It can also go the other way around, where something fully invented can become something real in pop culture. And the best example for this is Pekka Galiaga's Undin in Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Now, Pekka Galiaga drew inspiration for the Undin from the Undines, which is the Greek water spirit, and then he just added Filipino water spirit, a personality that was Filipino water spirit to it. And because the Undin was so popular, right now we talk about the Undin as if it was a real thing, even though we all know it came from Shake, Rattle, and Roll. So that is the best example of a local made-up monster breaking away from from fiction, from the big screen into the public consciousness. So aside from fiction, I also like listening to other people's real life encounters with the supernatural. And I sometimes write about my encounters as well. And sometimes I interview experts or learned enthusiasts about dark matters that include, bakit lahat tayo, nung grade school tayo, may narinig tayong kwento na grade school natin, dating, bago naging grade school, naging cementerio siya, tapos naging church, tapos naging hospital. Bakit palaging church, cementerio, hospital? Saka bakit palaging grade school? So yun yung mga gusto kong malaman na tanong. Kasi naniniwala ako na hindi lang sila pa-cute na tanong. If we can answer these questions from an academic point of view, from a scientific point of view, from a historical point of view, we will be closer to understanding why we have certain monsters, what these monsters mean when, in terms of like how these monsters reflect our society's fears and anxieties. I think there is more to be learned from supernatural stories beyond ay nakakatakot siya. Na something that we haven't yet explored. Hindi lang kulang, hindi pa siya na-explore at all. Another example of this would be dark tourism. For example, sa ibang bansa, usong-uso ang mga ghost tours. Tapos pag pumunta ka sa ghost tour na yon, hindi lang kwentong multo yung maririnig mo. You're also going to hear a lot about the history of the place, down to, ito yung nangyari, ito yung pangalan ng, down to they know who might be haunting the place because they've researched the history. That's something we don't have in our own history. It's an aspect that we don't think of as history. Whereas, when you think about it, kung may multo yung lugar na to, ibig sabihin may namatay dun. Bakit siya namatay dun? Ano yung mga factors na leading up to that death? Ano yung economic story, history niya, ano yung nangyayari in society at that time. Bakit siya to lead up to that death. So that this ghost story, if properly researched, can tell us a whole lot about our past. It's something that needs exploring. Okay, so I've talked about this already. Mythology, folklore, urban legends, they're not static. So they're not stuck to the insides of a book. They're not stuck to an episode of Magandang Gabi Bayan. They're ongoing. They're ever changing. They're very vibrant and dynamic. So I already gave you the example of the elementary school that was formerly a hospital, church, or cemetery. I heard that growing up, and apparently hanggang ngayon, naririnig pa rin ng mga bata. So tuloy-tuloy pa rin siya. Hindi siya, pardon the pun, hindi siya namamatay. Another new urban legend, another new modern mythology that I recently heard, I think last week ko lang narinig or 2 weeks ago, is Junjun. Si Junjun, is what every call center calls the weird things that happen in their office. So sometimes things will go missing, sometimes lights will turn on and off, sometimes somebody will be there, yun pala, walang tao. Lahat ng mga nangyayaring kababalaghan sa call center, they attribute to Junjun. So again, it's an ongoing thing, it's dynamic, it's new, and it's real to the people that have experienced it. And another way and even though we're talking about monsters, they've also managed to integrate themselves into the modern world. And my example is my story that involves aswang and text messaging. There was one time, nasa Romblon ako, nasa bahay ng friend ko, narinig ko yung kasambahay nila. Kausap ng kasambahay nila yung anak niya. Pero they were speaking in Tagalog, so naintindihan ko. Sabi ng anak ng kasambahay, sabi ng anak sa nanay niya, "Nay, may natanggap akong text message. Mass text siya. May eskapong a family of aswangs escaped from one of the islands, and they're swimming to way to this one right now." So the mom, sabi ng nanay, the mom was like, okay, we'll just tell them we're going home early tonight. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. So aswangs and text messaging. So it's very dynamic. And to these people, it's very real. So pati ako natakot ako. I'm like, okay, I'm going to close the windows this tonight. I don't want anything to happen to me just in case. So why are history and science important in horror storytelling and studying the paranormal? So as I've explained, grounding in history and science makes it easier for the reader to suspend disbelief, and eliminating natural causes offer more proof that the supernatural exists. So once we've, aside from being able to properly tell the stories of the spirits in an area, if we really want to show people that these things are real, we have to eliminate all the natural causes. So it's, and sometimes kasi, like what we think of as supernatural can have very, very natural causes, like electromagnetic fields or sounds that humans cannot hear, but like sound frequencies that humans cannot hear, but can on a subconscious level feel. So these are things that have been scientifically proven, and they should be used. I believe that if they were used more often in investigating supernatural phenomena, it can weed out what actually has a physical and scientific explanation. Also, it can help people feel better because at least now you know you have an explanation for a phenomenon. So all of these things, I write, why do I come up with these stories? The number one reason is because it makes me feel better. When I started writing, I didn't write to publish a book. I wrote because these are stories that I wanted to read. Writing has helped me express complex emotions, especially in the case of my story that involved my father. It helped me make sense of the world. Kasi yun nga, takot din akong bata, takot ako sa lahat. So, um, kahit natakot ako sa mga kababalaghan, mukhang yun yung lumalabas kasi nga takot ako sa lahat ng bagay. Also, I get to tell stories that I wish I could read about. So the bad thing about this is if I have what's more important to me personally is reading. So if I have access to books, the stories that I like reading, I'm not gonna write. But because I couldn't find certain stories at this time, was when I started writing this way. When I started writing, nobody was writing stories that involve local folklore. And this is what I wanted to see. So I had to write my own stories. That's why all my stories revolve around these things because I couldn't find anything that did that at that time. And at the same time, I didn't know that this was going to happen, but writing stories help me connect with people who feel the same way. And altogether, we realize that we're not alone. And the most important thing is it's fun for me. I wouldn't do any something if it's not fun. And these things offered me comfort, offered me joy, offered me respite. And that's why I wrote. So even though I was a fearful child and so many things scared me, I managed to use all these, everything I was curious about, everything I was scared of, I managed to turn them into stories. And like this meme shows, when you can sometimes use your demons to your advantage and everything works out. So that is the end of my presentation. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Yvette_Tan. My website is YvetteTan.com. It's called Miss Universe because it's Miss Yvette's Strange Universe. And like I mentioned, that's where I put all my true horror, true life horror, weird news things. And then you can also check out my book. That's it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions about my process, please let me know.
Thank you po. Wow, that's such a great presentation. Hold on. Ma'am Andre, are you there? There we go. Ma'am Andre. Hello, Ma'am Andre. Sa
Hello
ating
po.
mga, when I was the beginning part of the presentation, when you're talking about the building that was being built and then the bridge, I was having goosebumps. um, Really great, Juan po. We have a couple of questions actually. We've already gathered a couple of questions. Sa mga may tanong po dyan online, to those who are watching live online, be fortunate that we have Miss Yvette Tan here with us. You could ask her questions, and yun nga, when I was I know I've seen the Ilawod banner before, the poster, but I'm surprised that it was you actually that wrote the screenplay for that.
Oh,
Yeah. Yes, I'm very impressed. Po. I'm very impressed. And I think I've seen the trailer of Ilawod also, and definitely now it's one of those movies that I will put in my list of to watch movies on the top of the
thank
list.
you.
Yes. Thank you.
The
Po.
funny thing about Ilawod that I didn't say in the presentation was that I have been approached by 3 different psychics who I respect, and they all said that, what research did you do? Because it's very close to our experience. And these people don't know each other. So I'm like, that's interesting. So yeah. And it's
Really
really just
interesting.
from reading a lot of book and hearing a lot of folklore stories.
I'm sure you get a lot of that though when you write these stories and they're like, I can relate to that. I can relate to the story that you've written. So for with that in mind, uh, what do you think is the role of these like urban legends or like these stories in our culture as Filipinos?
Okay, I think that these stories serve as warnings sometimes, and sometimes as ways to control people. Like,
Mm.
di ba there's a theory that aswangs were used as psyops by the Americans,
Yeah.
like during World War II, to keep people from, to keep people from going out, to keep people from killing the Americans.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
it
yeah.
can be used as a form of control, especially in the San Juanico Bridge urban legend. It could be used as a form of control for children. Don't go out at night, or else you'll get abducted and sacrificed to the bridge. So it
I
can be
could
part of it.
I could relate to that because I use that to scare my kids also when I want them to sleep. So when
Oh
you say
no.
when you say when you say it's used as a control, sometimes I grew up like that. That's why my mom used that to me. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in
Yeah.
stuff. It's not my stuff. Um, but when I was young, I know my mom my mom would use that to scare me. And when I was young, I was indeed scared of ghosts. Um, but I still use that to my kids now to control them, to teach to tell them, watch out, close your eyes because there's somebody looking at us in the window, with red eyes and like red eyes and like a black dress. And then true enough, they'll go to sleep. They'd be scared going to sleep. Anyways, I
And
see. I was able to relate to that with the control that you mentioned.
another reason is it could be a gauge for what society is scared of at that moment. At the moment
Oh,
that um, that that urban legend was conceived, and depending on how long it lasts, if that fear is still there, if that social fear is still there. So my best example is foreign, and in people, if you notice, American horror movies have a pattern. They have themes based on each decade will have a theme, and each theme will be what the public is scared of at that time. So, for example, in the '60s, people were scared of nuclear things like
yeah.
nuclear bombs. The American movies were all about, nuclear accidents, giant insects, giant women. In the '70s, it was a fear of fear of the sexual liberation. Um, so you had movies that involved like lesbian vampires. So the fear of the homosexual, and this
Mm.
goes on. And I believe that folklore in the States, horror movies have replaced, not replaced, but are it functions the same way. Folklore functions the same way. It's a mirror of what society is afraid of at that.
You've hit that question on the nail on the head. Really, I mean, I really great. I love your answer. I guess definitely I could relate to that. The role of urban legends in our culture. Even if, like I said, even if we don't believe it, there are ways that we can relate to our culture in the Philippines. I'm gonna ask one question here from our audience, from those who are watching live. Ma'am Marianne Moll. She said, "Do you think Filipinos can write a very subtle horror story, and it will still be appreciated as horror, or does it have to be over the top horrific?"
Oh,
Good
hi
question.
Marianne, I know her.
Oh,
Okay.
The answer, thank you for coming. The answer is yes to all. I think that Filipinos, there, I think that there will be Filipinos who will be able to appreciate a very subtle horror story, and also, but I think most people will understand it faster and easier if it's over the top horrific.
mm,
So but I think that especially now we have a lot of uh, we're exposed to a lot of different ways of storytelling thanks to different service providers like Netflix, so on and so forth. So we're able to we're more exposed to different ways of storytelling. So I think um, there will be an audience for everything. It may be hard to find, but they will be there.
Yes. Really, kwan po, ano, and, you know, like what you mentioned a while ago, it, it seems like the stories that you write is kind of like really just subtle horror, kind of like subtle horror story, but many still gets, you know, really terrified with the experience of you know, the stories. Um, so here's another question that I have. Um, what do you enjoy most about writing your stories?
Um, I enjoy expressing myself. I enjoy telling a story that I haven't read before. That I enjoy reading a story that I want to read, even though I'm the one writing it. Because, like I mentioned, I'm actually really lazy. I would rather just read than write. But if I can't find a story, then I have no choice. I have to write it myself. So it's both. It's both. Yeah, like that is what I enjoy the most. Oh, okay, I'm reading a story I want to read.
Nice. Well, follow up question with that. What made you interested in writing about folkloric or horror stories?
I actually don't know. Um, like I mentioned, takutin ako. So it's really what I gravitate to. So I really have no answer to that. So a lot of people actually they look at me and they're like, "Hindi ka mukhang horror writer."
Yeah.
I, so I guess the best answer would be I may not know why I gravitate towards them, but horror is the way I make sense of the world.
Oh, okay. There's another question here from our audience. She said, totoo ba ang chismis na may inilalagay na dugo mula sa pugot na ulo ng mga tulay na ginagawa para po tumibay mula po kasi sa bata ako. Yes, I've heard about that story
Yes,
also
true.
myself. Di ba, Ma'am Andre?
Yes po.
Hindi ko yun talaga, I've never heard of that. Kasi niririnig ko lang is
Yes.
dugo.
Okay. Historically speaking po, there was this research na pinatotoo po na dito sa Visayas po, Japanese period, merong mga bata po na inihulog sa tulay para tumibay po yung pundasyon ng tulay. At any case po, meron din sa mga buildings na ginagawang, dinalagay po yung the buhay o pinatay na bata, I'm not sure po, pero yun po sa mga researches na lumabas. Yung sa tulay po, may research akong nabasa tungkol doon dito sa Visayas. Pero yung sa buildings po, nung unang panahon daw po, nilalagay nila yung bata or katawan sa isang building para tumibay po.
Yun, narinig ko rin yun.
Yun
Saka,
po.
pero ngayon, hindi na bata. Manok na ngayon ang ginagamit.
I've heard that one too.
Yes. And it's not just for buildings now. Sometimes they'll use it for in fields. Mag-aalay sila para maganda yung harvest.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Yes
yeah.
po.
And it's not just in the Philippines. Other countries have their versions of this
Oh,
also.
really? So
Like
it's a
like
culture
in
that
England,
kind of
yeah, in England, they'll put a live cat in the building in the old times. Kaya ngayon, sa mga lumang bahay, minsan makikita silang skeleton ng pusa. Dahil may ganung ang belief na you have to spill blood or put something, imbue the building with a soul. Or the bridge
In
or
that line
whatever.
of thought, Ma'am Yvette, there's a question from our viewers. How much has your travels influenced your writing, specifically when you went to Nola and Calao Cave? Have they somehow validated or otherwise any preconceived ideas about the spirit realm? Thank you for this interesting talk, Ma'am Yvette.
Oh,
Yun po
thank you for
sabi
the
niya.
question. Oh, okay. This person has read my blog. Thank you for that. Um, Weird. Okay, so all my stories, I try to base my stories on Philippine in the Philippine context. So weirdly, my travels overseas have made me realize that these things are true. So the viewer mentioned New Orleans, and that is where I accidentally became sensitive. So yun nangyari doon. And it also still relates to the Philippines, even though I was in the States. Because I was visiting before this when I was, blank, could not feel anything. And I was happy, very, very happy. Don't want to experience nothing, nothing. And I went to New Orleans. And then, I was with a friend. We did everything. We did all the cemeteries in the French Quarter. My friend, sensitive yung friend ko. Classmates kami ng college, pero nasa States na siya ngayon. So, binisita niya ako sa New Orleans. Nag-tour-tour kami. Tapos siya, nung sa hotel, every night, may narinig siyang nagbubulabog. Ako naman parang, wala naman ako narinig ah. So, baka side lang ng bed mo yun. And then, umuwi siya, bumalik siya New Jersey, tinur ko yung plantations na mag-isa. Tapos, nung pauwi na, on the bus back to the hotel, I heard a voice in my head, in Tagalog. I talk to myself in English. So, in Tagalog, sabi niya, magpagpag ka. Parang, ba't ako magpagpag? Di naman ako galing sementeryo. Completely forgetting na a plantation is, diba, it's all about death and sadness and, definitely a place you should make pagpag after.
Yeah.
So I go back to the hotel. That night, di ako makatulog kasi every time I turn off the lights, may maingay, may nagbubulabog. I'm like, what's going on? The next day, so I sleep with the lights on. The next day, I get a text from somebody in Manila who's psychic. And this person's like, oh, kumusta dyan? This is Rob Rubin from Mysterio Manila. I'm like, who are you with? I'm like, I'm not with anyone. So turns out, two spirits had followed me back. And then I asked Robert, oh, so what should I do to make sure that they stay? They don't follow me back to wherever. So he told me what to do. I had to offer oysters. Offer oysters to them, keep them as close to the ground as possible, and so that they'll stay in New Orleans and not follow me. So I had to find a restaurant that was open. I had to cancel my plans, go there, buy oysters, which were expensive, blowing my budget. I placed it. The weird thing is, so nung inalay ko siya, parang alam ng waiter. Kasi hindi niya ginagalaw yung oyster na iniwan ko sa tabo. Ginagalaw lang niya yung pagkain ko. Nasa pala, sa Pilipinas, kung sa Pilipinas yung nangyari, the waitress or the waiter be like, ma'am, di ba ba yung kakainin? Sayang naman yan. Ba't siya nandiyan? Nililipas ka na ba? Di ba? Doon parang feel ko talaga magkakonsyaba yung mga espiritu ng New Orleans saka yung wait staff nila. Kasi even when I left, hindi niya ginalaw. So, di naman sumunod. But after that, I became more sensitive. Like, I'll go into a room now and feel energies, and it's not fun. So anyone who tells you that, oh, I'm sensitive, it's a gift. No, it's not. Medyo nakakainis siya. Annoying. It hasn't made my way into my fiction, but these stories make me realize that my being Filipino will follow me wherever, because if I had made pagpag, which is a Filipino thing, baka hindi ito nangyari. Diba? And I realized also na mahal mang friend zone at pamatay ang beauty ko. Literally, pampatay ang beauty ko. Kasi sa ibang bansa, hindi sa Pilipinas. Tinanong ko kasi yung friend ko, ba't ako sinundan? Sabi niya, because they like exotic women. So literally, pampatay yung beauty ko.
Oh. Really, really, really interesting stories. I'm sure many of our audience also are have all these. I think I've seen this a while ago. Oh, yun. I see this story. From John Riz Ibisate. May naalala po akong vlog. Can't remember if it was Mikey Bustos, where he talks about his parents scare him of ghosts in order for him to behave in one place where he was a child. Wag ka dyan, may mumu dyan. Nilista niya daw po ang mga lugar na walang mumu, which ended the CR to be mumu free. It's funny because I can relate. I mean, there goes again the role of these kind of stories in our culture. To like what you said, Paul, try to control. With my children, I tell them because like I said, I we have different beliefs. I don't believe in ghosts personally. So I tell my kids, it's just to entertain our imagination. Just to
Yes.
build our imagination. You know, um,
I
Here's
would have said
another
I
question.
didn't believe either, except New Orleans happened. So and the person mentioned the CR, and I'd like to add to that. So a
Yeah.
lot of these supernatural occurrences happens in places of flux. So where
Oh.
people pass, diba? So CR, crossroads, liminal spaces, where spaces of impermanence, and that could
Mm,
be it could either be if ghosts are real, they're attracted to areas like that because ghosts are impermanent and not of this world, or if they are products of our imagination, it could be that we attach them to spaces, to liminal spaces,
yeah.
precisely because they themselves are also impermanent.
Yes, that's true. Ito po, si Sir JP Philbert, sabi niya, Ma'am Yvette, ito po ba yung sabi nila? I saw this a while ago, natawa po ako. Kapag ang aswang naghiwalay ang katawan para hindi makabalik sa kanyang katawan, lagyan po ng abo ng asin. Gayun din po ang dapat lagyan natin ng ating bulsa ng coins para hindi tayo mabuhat ng aswang. Right?
Pero paano kung nag-weightlifting yung aswang?
Oo, yun nga po eh. Yun
Kayang-kaya
nga.
yan.
I'm interested to know also the answer for this one, just Sir JP Philbert. And here's another one that's related to this. Of all vegetable, why bawang? Why bawang po do you think?
Actually, I wrote about that on my blog. I can't remember why, but at the moment, but I wrote about it in my blog. How, diba, bawang isn't just something that scares our aswangs. It also scares Romanian vampires, diba?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a universal thing. What I'm sorry, I can't answer your question properly from a Pinoy point of view because I don't remember. But from a European point of view, garlic and onion were said to be of the devil.
Oh.
So there's folklore that says that when the Satan stepped on earth, his first step, garlic grew. His second step, onion grew. So that could be part of it. But I think in Philippine folklore, kasi mabaho siya sa mga aswang. Mabango siya sa atin, mabaho siya sa mga aswang. Could
Mm,
be that. Salt naman, same thing like sinabi ni JP, there is a belief na if you put salt on top of the half of the aswang, hindi siya makakabalik. Kasi it's an open wound. And salt is
oh.
painful. So it functions in that way also. And I think it's as simple as that. It repels, hindi siya mabango, mabaho siya for the aswang. So
Well,
it could be that.
in a scientific point of view, alam niyo naisip ko ito yung konpo. Kasi sabi nga, yung mga aswang vampires, right, they have fangs, they will bite, like how a snake would bite. And if they bite you, your blood will start to clot. And bawang is a anticoagulant, di ba? Di ba? Bawang is a blood thinner,
Oh, that could be yeah,
right?
that could be that. Yeah,
See,
it could be
it
that.
has like the kind of like the scientific background to it also. Like I don't know, but that just came to my mind because I know with yun nga Ang bawang talaga, it's an anticoagulant vegetable, and at the same time, it's a blood thinner. Ginagamit ng mga high blood, mga
So
naka-high blood.
that's it just shows why science is very important in studying folklore, because over the decades we just hear na kasi mabaho sa kanila yon, but for all we know our ancestors used bawang to scare away aswangs because of that, because of its anticoagulant
Yeah.
properties that they knew before but couldn't express. So in their heads, kasi all they know is kasi mabaho siya.
And here's another. Uh, she was one of our Kwanpo guests here before in Collected. She's also written a couple of books, and her husband is an illustrator, Ma'am Bambi Amago, who is also from UP. She has a question. After you become more sensitive, are there instances where spirits ask for your help for unfinished business? Wow.
Oh, no, I'm not psychic. I'm sensitive. I'm not psychic. So it just means that I get into weird, I just have weird stories to tell friends. That's about it. So I go into rooms and don't feel well. Thankfully, that's the most. I don't see, I don't hear, I don't feel, I don't want to. I would just rather write about these things in fiction. So
Here's
it
her,
usually means yeah.
Here's this question from Sir Philbert Paul. Ma'am Yvette, not a question, but Ma'am Yvette, your stories are scary and interesting.
Thank
Yun nga, di
you.
ba? Is it true spirits like quiet atmosphere of churches and stay there a lot?
You know, I keep yes and no, because I hear stories about um, how spirits like quiet places, they'll gravitate to empty houses. But at the same time, I also hear stories about how, for example, Casambagyo, for example, I've heard people say more than once that not everyone you encounter there is alive, but you don't know.
Wow.
So I guess it might be safer to say that if spirits will go where they're comfortable. And I've
Wow.
also realized they might also take the form of what they're comfortable with. So a lot of the time, we're going to hear a lot of stories from office buildings na may batang naglalaro. Pero wala naman namatay na bata dun. So it could be just somebody who really liked who they were as a child and chose to stay in that form.
Really, really interesting. Ito po sabi ni Sir Phil, marami po niyan, Sir Ann. I think he was referring to the ano to, yung bawang a while ago. Yung sabi po nila kapag gumawa ng sound, yung akala ko sabi niya TikTok, yung tik-tik o aswang na nagti-TikTok. Tik-tik o yung aswang. I think Ma'am Andre mentioned this before. Nagtik-tik-tik, alin yung tik-tik?
It's
The
the
sound that they make, they said, o aswang kung malakas, malayo, kung malapit, na mahina
Yes
daw.
po. Pag malayo, malapit na siya. Pag malapit, malayo na siya.
Yung sound ng
po.
tik-tik. Wow.
So it's a
Yes
belief
po.
na yeah.
Here's another one. Here's another one from Ma'am Bambi. They say Star Mall in Alabang is also haunted because it used to be a cemetery. The people with you in the cinema are not all human. Oh my God.
I've heard that
Oh,
also.
really?
I'm definitely not gonna go around and start checking if they're human or not.
Like I've heard stories of people who will look at their the people there within the cinema and they're all like in formal wear, Filipiniana.
Oh
Like,
no. It would be interesting to dress up like that actually, just to piss off people or like to scare them. To scare them, you know. I'll go wear my white barong or what they call this, my piña barong there, and just sit there and put bulak in my nose. Sit there at the back. Sit at the back para makita ng lahat. Really interesting po. Ma'am Yvette, thank you so much for this great time. We really enjoyed this, Kwan po. What do you call this? It flatters our imagination because it helps us kind of imagine these. I have a new way to scare my kids. No, but yeah, my kids knows, and they also themselves know it. These are just stories, and as much as I tell them, it's like, with I know we all have different beliefs. Well, like I said, we all have different beliefs, and I respect the different beliefs. But with my kids, the way I explain it to them was that well, like how Superman, when we make stories about Superman, it's like really because we imagine things, and we create these. Stories, and then we build these stories, these creative minds, and it becomes really entertaining, and that's how I explain it to my kids. But like I said, I respect many beliefs, and these are entertaining, and it has come to the point also before where I actually enjoyed reading these like scary stories, lalo na yung comics po, di ba, Ma'am Yvette?
Mhm.
Nauso po yung comics, right? And
Yes.
you could actually imagine it in their own. Ang gagaling ng mga illustration, and then you're reading this while you're at the bathroom. At yun po yun siguro sinasabi ni Mikey Bustos na when he's in the bathroom he'd be more scared, or think checking if there's a multo or mumo there in the bathroom.
Actually, my second book, Kaba, I wrote specifically for bathroom reading. So they're short stories in
Oh,
Tagalog.
nice.
And, it's for when you're in line, pag nakapila ka, pag nasa CR ka, like, no commitment, very, very short. And in Tagalog, so if you want to brush up on your Tagalog, like,
That is really great. Well,
yeah.
yeah, that's really great. And then those are things that we can share to our teachers. Like I said, Mama Andre is also a teacher, and also we didn't get to tell you about 90% of our viewers here in Kultura are teachers. Kaya po marami sila sa kanila hindi sila nanonood po ngayon kasi they are there in the school teaching.
I,
But many of them po watch it as a playback later on tonight, or well tonight later on in your time. At nighttime po. They will watch it, and then they watches the playback. And we encourage them that to listen to these lectures, and even use your books as references. And you mentioned that your book actually is ready for pre-order po. Which book was that? That's ready for
Waking
pre.
the Dead. Waking the Dead. You can pre-order it on the Anvil website.
Yeah, see, to our teachers who are watching live online, you can pre-order it at Anvil website. Is it also going to be in Lazada po, your book?
Yes, the ebook is currently in Lazada.
Oh, see, there we go.
But
And you
it
can
will be
use.
available on Amazon and other portals soon. And of course, you can also get that's for people overseas. But for here, if you want the hard copy, you can order it through Anvil and Lazada, I think.
Yeah, and see, I mean, and we were already, like I said, Ma'am Andre, even last time, we're already in the 32nd or 33rd episode of
33rd.
Kolekteratura. And
Yes po.
we've talked about a lot of books. Our teachers, there's a reason why we gather these lecturers po. Use them as references when you're teaching. At least kung masasabi po ninyo, oh, I watched a talk where this author, right, talked about this book, in your classes. Use them as references po. It'd be interesting. Go ahead po, Ma'am Andre.
Sir, before we let go of Ma'am Yvette, I am a horror reader by heart. So I'm so excited to have a talk with you. And one question that pops up in my mind na hindi ko talaga malubos maisip na nakausap ko kayo po. Kasi when I was still in college, I was a fan of PSI, Philippine Ghost Stories. Lahat ng
Okay.
edition, lahat ng book 1 to 320, mayroon po ako. So,
Oh,
scary
naman.
Um,
story to say that your story indeed is a success for your readers po, reader satisfaction po. Yung parang,
Thank you.
paano, yes po.
Ano, sorry, continue. Medyo nag-on off yung
Yung
sound,
audio, oo.
yung audio.
Okay. As a horror writer, how scary should be a scary story for you to say that your story is indeed a success for your readers satisfaction po? Paano po
Um,
nalalaman na yung story ito successful to horror story kasi natatakot yung reader ko or paano ba po?
Actually, I don't know how to answer that question because as the first person, the reader I try to satisfy is me.
Oh,
So,
okay.
you can. I think it's easy to tell if I'm not into something. You can tell right away by the way it's written. But if I'm really into it, I think that enthusiasm, nakakahawang enthusiasm na yun. So super thankful ako na nagustuhan ng mga ibang tao yung sulat na yun. But really, I should be happy. I think that is the most important thing for me. So, and like I mentioned, hindi naman nakakatakot yung mga kwento ko eh. But yung iba, natatakot sila.
Really
Magandang
interesting. I think that's what caught me also a while ago. Yung sinabi po ninyo ng ganun na you didn't. It seems like it's not a really for you. For you, it's not a really scary story. Pero yung mga iba natatakot sila. I think that's something that's really interesting. It made me more interested to read actually your book because I wonder to what extent. Siguro, I think that's what Ma'am Andrea is also asking. Is like there's a level of it being scary. In what level do you think it's actually a scary or not? But I think we all have different tastes of what's scary. And sa mga anak ko, sabihin ko lang sa kanila na, oh, there's a lady in black dress with a red eye. That's for them. They're like, oh, they're scary. They're gonna cover themselves with a blanket. But that's not even saying that the lady has fangs or the lady has a horn in her head. Uh, but those are different. I guess different. It depends on our taste. Siguro po. I wanna say it like that. It depends on our taste. Um,
Yes. Like
I
for
think there's no
me,
more.
if you,
Oh,
no,
oh, go ahead.
just to add to your point, for me, if you read my stories, the scariest monsters are really humans.
Oh,
taong buhay.
Yes.
yes, that's true. That is true. Um, you mentioned a while ago your book. Please tell us your book po and encourage our teachers. Let them know about your books and hopefully po they get a chance to get a copy of your books.
Okay. I have two books out. One is called Waking the Dead. It's short stories in English, published by Anvil. It's reissued right now, so you can pre-order your copy on the Anvil website or on the Anvil Lazada page. And I have a short, a second collection in Tagalog, short horror stories in Tagalog. It's called Kaba. 5 maikling kwento ng kababalaghan at katatakutan, published by ANS Publishing, All and Sundry Publishing. You can get it on the ANS website. And I think they also have a Lazada store or a Shopee store. Please use, I hope that they can be of help to you. And I hope that they can be of help to your students. So some of them are very age appropriate, like Kulog is a children's story, for example. So, and there are others for more mature readers naman.
Yes,
You
and that's
recommend it.
I think it's gonna be it's good because especially the author is a Filipino, so it's something that we could relate with in our culture. If your topic would be our culture, you could always integrate it to your lessons, po. These stories or these, and sometimes you could even use it as an anecdote in your teaching. Use it as an anecdote or try to, if you see your students already falling asleep, then use your imagination, use some of the stories of Ma'am Yvette, read a part of her story to wake them up, so something like that. I know many of you teachers are very artistic and are very creative in your teaching. So you could use this po in your whether you're teaching science, whether you're teaching psychology, whether you're teaching Philippine history. You can use these books po to in your teaching, to integrate in your own subjects po, in your own teaching. Anyways, Ma'am Yvette, thank you so much for this great time. We are looking forward to someday gathering all our guest lecturers in person, and sana po makasama po kayo, and then we can bring all your books together and feature your books in our in-person kultura meetup, sa mga grand meetup ng mga kwan po, mga sumusubaybay sa kultura. And definitely your book is going to be, it sounds like it's going to be one of my favorites in our collections, because I like short stories. I don't like really long ones. I don't even try to get a hold of the book Gone with the Wind. I don't know if you've heard about the book Gone with the Wind, to see how thick that book is. I don't even want to look at it. But short stories, I'm good. I'm good with short stories. Thank you so much, Miss Yvette Tan. This is our certificate for you, certificate of recognition, awarded to Miss Yvette Tan to recognize her generous participation as a guest in our event, KULECTERATURA Season 1, Episode 33, The People of Chismis in Folkloric Storytelling, held live at the Kultura Facebook page, through Zoom, or through StreamYard and Facebook Live in November 16, 2021, and is hereby awarded this certificate by the Riverboy Studios through Kultura, November 16, 2021. Signed, our Kultura Managing Director, Nanay Ami, who is also here watching, by the way. She's there watching. Ma'am Andre, our Kultura Programs Managing Director, and myself po, your Executive Director for Kultura. We are presenting to you this certificate. We will be sending you a digital certificate po, when we gather all the information and the signatures from our managing directors. But anyways po, ma'am, thank you so much for this time. You've probably taken this time from your busy time to teach to us, and we really appreciate it po.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ma'am
Yes, it's
Yvette,
so much
for...
pleasure po. Ma'am Andre?
Yes po. Thank you, Ma'am Yvette, for accepting our invitation. Maraming salamat po. And for those kakultura teachers and kultura avid fans who are waiting for the Kultura Code for today's event, episode 33 with Ma'am Yvette. Kultura Code is KC332. Again, Kultura Code KC332. See you again on November 30 for another Kolektratura with Sir Venadera. Maraming salamat mga kakultura. See you again by then. Have a good afternoon po. Thank you, Ma'am Yvette.
Thank you po sa lahat. Again, Ma'am Yvette, we thank you so much. Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat dyan sa Pilipinas, and good night here from Seattle. It's 10:27 p.m. here in Seattle. Really cold already po. It's always raining, it seems like, here in Seattle, and always gloomy. Bagay na bagay sa mga horror stories. Good night po sa inyong lahat, Ma'am Yvette. Again, thank you. Good night. Ma'am Andre, good night po sa inyo. Thank you po.
Ngayon'y laging gulong-gulong ang puso ko isipa. Araw-gabi ay pangarap ka, pag-asa at sa tuwi na kinababalisa. Dahil ba ang puso ko'y labis na umiibig sa'yo, hanggang kailan matitiis ilip ang pag-ibig ko. Ano ang